All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the January 20th Policy and Planning Commission meeting. Time is 6:30. Due to the virtual format of today's meeting, I'd like to start by providing some guidelines. We have participants attending by computer and others who may be attending by phone. For all meeting attendees, who wish to speak, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If having technical difficulties, try joining the meeting using a different device such as a smartphone or tablet. Use the call-in information provided in the meeting invite. Now we'll move to attendance, and we'll have Kristen do with Policy and Planning Commission, and we will have Lucy take care of Development Commission.
Okay, so Commissioner Bader? No, so I'll have to check on that one. I don't recall. Have to check on that one. Commissioner Lewis?
Here.
Commissioner Monahan?
Here.
Vice Chair Voice?
Here.
Chair Fall?
Here.
And we have excused our Commissioners Milligan and Zaragoza, and I just remembered that, yes, Commissioner Bader is an excused absence as well.
So for the Development Commission, Commissioner Brennan.
I'm here.
Commissioner Sanford.
Here.
Commissioner Soa.
Here.
Commissioner Dillon.
Here.
Commissioner Shore.
Here.
Commissioner Price.
Here.
Commissioner Schulte.
Here.
Commissioner Ikeda.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan. I saw him just a minute ago. I wonder if he got kicked out because I don't see him now.
Maybe so. We'll give it a few minutes, and when he pops back in, we will note that for the minutes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
There he is.
Commissioner Morgan, could you please say here for the roll, please? You left us for a minute. Commissioner Morgan, can you hear us?
I think Chair Brennan may be checking with him.
Okay, but he's here.
Yes, he is.
Technical difficulties. Okay.
Should I continue?
He may be calling in by phone.
Go ahead and continue. We'll get this worked out.
All right, and for tonight, we're going to have 3 opportunities for the public to make comments. The first opportunity is going to be for addressing the hearing tonight on the property development or the property rezoning, and then we will have an opportunity for public comment considering the Title 18 amendments before we actually have the presentation, and then we will have it during the presentation before the commission discussions, after the commission questions. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up for a public comment in regards to...
I apologize. There's a little glitch in the script. So first we need to do approval of minutes. I apologize. I don't think that was in there. And then actually we're going to have public comments before we do on just general public comments before the public hearing, according to the agenda.
Yes.
So minutes first.
Okay. So let's go ahead and approve the meeting minutes. Are there any changes proposed for the meeting minutes? Hearing none, the meeting minutes are approved. Okay, now we'll open up for public comment for the hearing.
This is public comment for just general public comment. And if anyone has anything they would like to say, if you could raise your virtual hand or press *3 on your phone. I am not seeing anyone who would like to speak.
Okay, excellent. So we'll go ahead and we're going to have Lucy take the presentation for the hearing tonight.
Actually, that will be me.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. You can hear me? Okay. All right, great. So yes, our public hearing tonight, it says 2021. It's on the 2022 docket of proposed comprehensive plan and zoning map amendments. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to present the proposed docket, then take public comment, then you all will deliberate, and then you will make a recommendation on the docket. Just as a reminder, the comprehensive plans may be amended just once a year. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, just once a year. So a docket must be approved prior to starting the amendment process. And what it ensures is that we have our list of proposed amendments and that everything is being looked at holistically and being considered at the same time so that one item doesn't come in later and negatively affect another item. We just want to make sure everything's working together. So the agenda came out twice. The packet came out twice. Because we had 2 additions to the docket. Hopefully all of you had a chance to look at the revised additions today. So this is our docket, and it consists of solely redesignations and rezones to properties. The first one, which came in about 2 weeks ago, is for our Savior Lutheran Church. I'll go through each of these individually in just a minute. They're asking to go from single-family small lot to multifamily high. The next one is a Newport area. You may recall we did this one last year, and there was a technical glitch, and though I tried, it cannot be done administratively. It must be done through a public hearing, so that our proposal is to take that from community facilities recreation to village residential. And the last one came in about 2 days ago, and it was the Wildwood parcel, and they are asking to go from single-family small lot to multifamily medium. The first one, our Savior Lutheran Church. It's located here on Front Street South between Wildwood Boulevard and Front Street South. It's about almost 3.5 acres. The current designation is low density residential. They are requesting multifamily residential designation. The existing zoning is single family small lot, and they are requesting multifamily high. And it's a little bit background. This is the parcel that they're requesting be rezoned right here. But they also own this parcel, a separate parcel which is zoned multifamily high. Next parcel, you may recall this from last year. I don't have the acreage on it yet. It is currently zoned, the land use designation is community facilities, and we are requesting that it be changed to multifamily residential. And it is currently has a community facilities recreation zoning on it, and we're requesting that it go to village residential, and I'll show you what happened. So last year, you may recall, the city acquired this parcel for park space and this parcel, for open space. And those were redesignated and rezoned as part of the 2021 comprehensive plan amendments. But what happened was when we started the amendment process and went in and selected this parcel, 2024069-107, it contained everything that's in this blue line right here. What we did not know was that in 2020, this property had a lot line adjustment, but we were unaware of this until after the rezone and redesignation had been approved. So what happened was this section here in orange was taken out of this parcel and is now part of this much larger parcel right here on which Anthology Apartments are located. So this and this, so it's sort of split zoning. This one parcel now has 2 zones, so this needs to be taken back to village residential. Our last request is one called Wildwood. It is just off of Wildwood Boulevard, close to Front Street South. It is currently, it's about almost 4 acres. The land use designation is low density residential. They're requesting multifamily residential. The existing zoning is single family small lot, and they are requesting multifamily medium. And just to show you, I showed you the other ones with zoning around it. So this is the parcel right here, single family small lot. It actually is this lot and this bigger lot. This one right here has a house on it. It is owned separately. It's a different parcel. And then you'll notice that the church parcel that is being requested is right there. So the process for this is that you all would make a recommendation tonight. Council would take action in February on the docket. Then staff would begin researching the proposed amendments. Probably not, it says March, but probably because of all of our Title 18 work and everything else that we have on, not until later in the summer. September, you all would get to see the proposed recommendations. October, we would hold a public hearing. November to a council study session. In December for council action. So questions for you all. Are there any amendments that need to be made this year that are not included on the docket as it's presented? And are the amendments presented on the proposed docket relevant and necessary this year? And a reminder that when you make a recommendation, that this is a recommendation regarding a list of amendments to be processed. It is not a recommendation regarding the amendments themselves. So if you say no, then this doesn't mean that something's not being rezoned. It just means that it's not on the list to be processed. And so your options here, you have several options. One is to approve the docket as presented. Another is to move one or more of the items to a following year. You could add items, because I did ask you if there's anything on here that you don't see on here that you think needs to be here. So you could add one or more items to the docket. And the other option is to just not approve it and not do it this year. We do have a big comprehensive plan update, the state mandated update coming up in 2023. And that's when we would do our next updates. So that's all I have. Would you like me to stop sharing? Or do you want me to keep it up there?
I would say keep it up until commissioners are done with their questions.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and open it up for commissioner questions.
And just as a reminder, and I see that everybody's got their cameras off, but this is just for the Planning Policy Commission to ask questions, deliberate, make a recommendation, not for the Development Commission. But we're glad you're here. We'll see you in a minute.
Okay. And the first person is Matt Monahan. So Commissioner Monahan, you have the floor.
Yeah, hi, Matt Monahan here. Kristen, have there ever been an instance where the PPC has recommended to not approve the docket at this stage?
I haven't seen it where they've recommended to not approve the entire docket. There have been several instances where they have not approved certain items on a docket. Yeah.
And do you recall generally what the considerations were? I'm asking you to generalize, which is probably really unfair, but what were some of the factors that weighed in favor of not approving certain items on the docket?
No, I can think. Let's see. Some things we just weren't quite ready for, or it was too much to take on. I remember, and then yeah. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific on that. I don't know. I do know in 2014, we did not do amendments at all, so we didn't bring a docket. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Should I just jump in here?
Thank you. And then next, Commissioner Voice, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Chair Fowl. Senior Planner Leeson. So quick question. You had mentioned that if it's not going to be processed, they can continue to move forward with the zoning. I didn't follow that. I thought if it's not on the list of approved dockets, it's pretty much stopped in its tracks, correct?
Yes. You can either, if I apologize if I said that, if it doesn't move forward on the docket this time, then no, it doesn't go forward at this time. I mean, you can move it to another year. You can propose that it be moved to another year, but if it's not on this year's docket, then it stops for this year.
Right. So again, they can continue to change or make little adjustments like the city is for their the Newport one. But if it's not approved for this year, it stops. And then again, they can continue to submit it, but for this year, it's not on the calendar.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Voice. Commissioner Lewis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Commissioner Joy Lewis here. I have some concerns about how addressing changes to the comp plan will end up affecting a timeline with the work we're doing on Title 18. Is it feasible that if changes to rezones that were put on the 2022 comp plan would be able to go through and then not be able to apply the future 2023 Title 18 passage? Does that make sense? Well, would the timeline basically be in conflict? Would the hard work that is being done to reformat Title 18 not apply depending on when people get permits and things into the city?
So are you asking? So, okay. So first,
On these rezones.
This won't slow down Title 18 at all.
I know it won't slow down Title 18. Would the rezones, depending on if they were able to get their permits in a very expeditious manner, not have to follow the newly constructed Title 18, as that's not going to be processed through until 2023? Would they be effectively grandfathered into an older standard of building codes?
Yes, I can tell you that neither has submitted a plan. It takes a long time, neither has submitted, but yes, if they were able to get plans in prior to approval of Title 18, then they would. Vesting is a touchy issue, but they would. I'm going to say they would likely. We always have to go check with our legal counsel. We always have to go check with counsel, but likely they would be grandfathered in to the old 18.
Thank you. My last question is if you can help clarify the difference between the do not approve and the move. Would we basically be voicing to council, the differences is we would be voicing to council, we think this has merit, just not in this calendar year, versus do not approve is just a hard stop. Is
Correct.
That really the full difference? Okay.
Nailed it.
Thank you.
Ron, you're muted.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't see any additional questions. Are there any additional questions from any of the members? Okay, hearing none. I do have a question. The Wildwood property and the church property, aren't those considered? Those are along Issaquah Creek. Specifically, the Wildwood property doesn't that have a lot of restrictions on it? Because it seems like that is within the buffer, and it also seems like it's a wetland.
So there are. See, this is not for us to look at totally yet, and it's the property. But yes, it is adjacent to the creek, and depending on which buffers, if they were to the ones that are here today were to apply, or anything new that was be adopted, those would apply to the property as well. There are steep slopes on the property, particularly along the east side of the property.
Not specifically. I don't know that I would consider it steep slopes.
Okay.
It looks boggy to me.
Okay. Our map shows it as critical areas, and usually that's steep slopes, but we'd have to look.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not seeing any additional questions, so let's go ahead and let's see. We're going to.
Could I ask a point of order? If we are going to take public comment, would the development commissioners be considered public and able to comment on the docket as a member of the public?
I don't believe so, because they are a quorum right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess what we need now is a motion. Would anybody like to make a motion?
Ron? We need to
Yes.
hear any public comment first. We need to open up the public hearing.
Oh, okay. I thought that's what we were doing in the beginning. So we
No,
want to do
that's
that
just the
again?
presentation and questions, and now we need to open up the public hearing for public comment.
Understood. Okay, let's go ahead and open up for public comment. Sorry, my mistake.
I am going to stop sharing because if I don't, then I can't see anybody who has their hands raised. Okay. So I do know that first I had 2 people write in. I know that Ken Konigsmark would like to speak. So Ken, I am going to make you a panelist. And you are now unmuted, and you can turn on your camera if you would like, and you have 5 minutes.
Okay, can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
You're very quiet, but we can hear you. Can you either speak louder?
I'll speak up. How's that?
That's good.
All right. Sorry, I tried to raise my hand and I can't find how to do it. So anyway, I want to speak to you on behalf of Our Savior Lutheran Church tonight about the exciting opportunity we believe we're bringing to the entire city with this rezone request for the property. I understand your workload is heavy. I understand the earlier decision was to not look at rezones this year, but I hope you will make an exception in this case, and I'll explain why. We're very hopeful to be in a partnership between our church and the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank, which is not able to meet the demand in the very cramped spaces they have, while at the same time, we have vacant building space, and as you saw, a total of about 4 acres of property, including the 3.35 acres we would like to get rezoned. The partnership would bring the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank to our property, and that is what is behind this rezone request. It's not about us wanting to sell for single-family home development or condo development. Our church seeks to do something good on behalf of the community that benefits the comp plan directly in 2 ways. First, with the opportunity we hope in the future to meet and help the city achieve affordable housing goals on some portion of this property. And the second goal, tied in with the Human Services Strategic Plan, being that we, in this partnership with the food bank, would be able to bring added beneficial services to those in need in our community, and hopefully, as things progress in the years ahead, like I said, being able to expand into other social services and potentially affordable housing, hopefully in partnership with the city. So again, this achieves the key goals, or helps to achieve key goals in the city's Human Services Strategic Plan. So again, the purpose of this rezone is to help facilitate the move of the food bank to our property and to be able to do any sort of expansion of our existing building that they may need, which hasn't been determined yet, but it would facilitate that if it were under a different zoning. And secondly, again, looking longer term, the opportunity for multifamily affordable housing units. Also, I will add that as you saw in the map shown by Kristen, we have 2 parcels, one of which is already zoned multifamily high. I believe this larger lot was likely left out of that zoning at the time it was added to these properties all around us, simply because it already had a church building on it. And so I suspect it was left in the SFSL zone, and it would bring our 2 lots into the same zoning and in cohesion with the lots all around us that are all zoned multifamily high density, including even the nursing home that's next to us. So we look forward to working with the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank to help them achieve their mission in a better way. Our church looks to partner with them to help provide volunteers to help in those services. And we look forward in the future to work with the city to do something very good on this 4-acre total property that helps to meet the city goals for housing and human services. So I ask you to support this rezone request as we've submitted. And again, the timing, I must add, is kind of critical because we hope to make a partnership agreement with the food bank within the next 3 to 4 months. And to help facilitate their move, we can't wait another year after this year to try to get that rezone. So it is an urgent issue. Thank you.
Next we have Susan Neville, who would like to speak. Susan, I am making you a panelist. You are unmuted. You can turn on your camera if you would like.
It's not working. So anyway, hello everyone, and thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I just wanted to speak to the Wildwood application submitted today, and this is a new thing for me to review, so bear with me as I go through my little list. I looked through the criteria, and as I went through each one, I want to start with number 1. And the criteria does it meet the current growth management targets, or have they been met? So I believe we have met our targets. So as I looked at number 1, I thought, well, that's not an agreement. So when I went to number 2, I realized the upzoning that they're asking for is outside the central Issaquah plan, but yet that's the zoning that they're wanting. When I went to number 3, not being consistent with the comprehensive plan, you did speak to that, so I understand that a little better. But I think the largest issue I have is the environmental impacts in the critical areas, and we did speak to that, thank you, a few of them. And I don't understand how, without really looking at the environmental impacts, how you can make this decision. And there was supposed to be more information in the packet, and I don't believe I saw it concerning this. So I just wanted to bring those points forward before you decide and make your decision this evening. And thank you for giving me my time.
Thank you. I am muting you and making you an attendee again. And then we have Connie Marsh, who would like to speak. Connie, you are a panelist. And you're now unmuted. You can turn on your camera.
Okay, let's see if I can turn on my camera. Okay, my name's Connie Marsh and I live on Squawk. So as usual at this point in time, I always want a discussion of the criteria for approval. What is unclear is whether we are supposed to be using the criteria for approval to put it on the docket. So I guess I don't really understand what the criteria is for getting it on the docket or not getting it on the docket. It's like, do we think it's okay? Do we not think it's okay? And that's really sort of too loose for me. So I will give you a little bit of history from last year, which is last year the city council didn't want to approve upzones outside of the central Issaquah area. And so I think that's an interesting thing to carry forward. How much time do we want to spend on something that we've already discussed and did last year? And this is basically asking the same question again. And I don't know if you guys can make that decision or not. The Wildwood property, that's coal mine hazard area, and it has springs in it, as I recall, and it is sloped, and it goes down to Issaquah Creek. the most beautiful thing is you have a single family house right there in the middle of those two parcels that it wants to increase the density on, which I would consider an extreme hardship to that single family house to have the high density housing built on either side of it and sort of wedging it. And so then I would like to go to what I would consider to be the appropriate pathway for the church property. Would be getting a memorandum of understanding between the clothing bank and this property in advance before I would say we should commit a lot of staff time to getting a rezone. Now, I hear Mr. Konigsmark saying that this is in the process, but if he was anyone other than who he is, I'd be going, yeah, right, sure. So I don't think that we want to put things on the docket with the promise of, oh, we're going to do good things. And I might want to do it for one person because I trust them, but then I would have to say, I just don't trust you to the next guy. So I think we have to be very consistent in what the appropriate process would be. Chicken or egg, you do the memorandum of understanding before you put it on the docket, or do you put it on the docket even though you don't have any reliability that this process is going to go forward? And I guess I would want to ask the staff what you're supposed to do, and maybe in the new the new code update or something, you could get some better language for this moment in time. Thanks.
We have David Toyer. David, I'm making you a panelist. You are unmuted and you may turn on your camera if you'd like.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Am I able to share?
I don't know, actually. I think
so. I just thought it'd be easier to bring up a couple of visual things, but it doesn't look like that's possible.
Okay.
So just wanted to introduce myself, David Toyer. I'm president of Toyer Strategic Advisors. We're a land use and economic development consulting firm located up on the docket.
There you go. You froze on us for a minute.
I'm sure well aware. Sorry. David Toyer, Toyer Strategic Advisors. I represent the applicant for Wildwood, the docket proposal. Appreciate your time this evening. As I'm sure you've all been through the process a few times before, this is a very early beginning to what is a larger process that involves quite a bit of public input and opportunities for the public to weigh in and comment on proposals. What we've proposed in this particular case is the property is adjacent to abutting existing multifamily medium density residential. And then it's an area where there's quite a few multifamily medium residential and high residential type projects already. It's a quarter-mile radius, quarter-mile walking distance to transit stops. It hits a lot of the criteria inside Vision 2050, which is the regional kind of comprehensive plan to help guide growth policies. It really fits in line with a number of your own community comprehensive plan policies. And we believe that there's a good merit here to put this forward in the docket process to study it, allow for additional public input. And then, at some point towards the end of the year, it would then get further consideration. So I'd be happy to answer questions you may have this evening. This is a plan level proposal, so there's not a project proposed. So I wouldn't have like information on a project, but definitely could talk to kind of the background and the idea behind why this makes sense from a policy perspective.
Thank you. And next we have Connie Fletcher. Connie, I am making you a panelist. You are unmuted and may turn on your camera if you would like. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I just want to clarify that regarding the church property and Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank, we do have a memorandum of understanding already with the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank. We've been working together for several months on this. And it's a really exciting project. We're looking forward to seeing it to completion. Thank you.
I don't see anyone else who would like to speak, but if you would like to, go ahead and raise your hand or press *3 or send me a note in the message box too. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. So we'll go ahead and open this up for commissioner
Ron?
discussion.
Excuse me, Chair Fall, you need to close the public hearing first.
Oh, okay. I thought we were still in the public hearing. Okay. No worries. Sorry. First time doing this. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Public comments. Right, Kristen? Not public hearing.
That was technically the public hearing part of it at 7:06.
Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the public comments at 7:06. And now we'll open it up for commissioner discussion, correct?
Yes, but if you wouldn't mind, may I address a few of the things that were discussed during public comment?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, this is a weird one to address first, but I just recently learned that no, attendees may not present anything on camera unless it has been sent to staff first, and then we would share it at that time. So just for future, that's something new I learned today, but now we all know. I also want to mention that the Clothing and Food Bank is actually considered a nonprofit and is allowed as a permitted use under single family small lot. So if they stayed the existing zoning, they could still have the Clothing and Food Bank located on their site. I want to remind you that this is not an approval of a rezone. It's an approval of a list. That's come up a few times. And Ms. Marsh brought up a very good point that I agree with, that it's confusing right now. And yes, we are trying to fix this in the code. We will, when the code comes out, we will have deadlines, different deadlines for proposed amendments. And we have talked about with our city attorney the criteria and fixing that. But now this is what we have. So this is what we're working with. And it's a no-win situation. I include the applications with these because if I don't, people want more information. And if I do, it's too much information. What are you supposed to look at? So I understand and I apologize. It's a little confusing. The criteria does not matter so much here. The requirement is that they submit a complete application. So the purpose of giving you that is to show that they have submitted a complete application. And yes, I agree, it gets confusing, but that's what that is. Lastly, I want to mention that Commissioner Bader came on at 6:50, joined us at 6:57 tonight. And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. And now we're going to open it up to commissioner discussion. Or is there another point of order?
Sorry. Yes. In order to open it up for discussion, someone needs to make a motion, and it needs to be seconded, and then you can start discussion on the motion.
So does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. So I will make a motion to open up discussion on the 2022 docket.
And is there a second?
I see Kristen.
The motion needs to be on a recommendation regarding the docket. So you would make a motion to move the docket forward as presented. Somebody would second, and then you would discuss, unless there was an amendment to the motion.
And he's got the options. So you've got
yes,
those
there are so many options. Yes.
Right. My hope was to do a little bit of deliberating with the fellow commissioners before we decided what to do with the docket.
So I think what Kristen's saying is we make a motion and then we can discuss it and then make an amendment to the motion.
you can vote on the motion. And if you don't like, and if everybody says no to the motion, you can do another motion and deliberate that one.
I'm going to let the lawyer in the room handle this one. Matt, I see you smiling, so all you, buddy.
I'm glad he's nodding. That means I'm saying the right things.
You are. So I will move to go forward with the proposed zonings, to docket the proposed rezones as presented. Is that good enough, Kristen? Okay.
And is there a second?
Yeah, I can step up and second that.
Okay.
Now,
now we will open it up to discussion. And if you have a comment, please go ahead and put it in the chat window. And the first person is Commissioner Voice.
Well, thank you, Chair Fowl. And yeah, that was a fun exercise. That's always fun. Unfortunately, with both the church and the Wildwood properties, I see a few problems. And chief among them, they're talking about multifamily in the city's biggest traffic choke point, Front Street. The city knows through surveys that traffic is by far and away the biggest problem that the city has. It completely overshadows almost everything in terms of people's frustrations within the city. And like I said, I can't think of a city that's more clogged up than Front Street. So allowing more multifamily right there on Front Street, just in a place that, again, we're not even through the pandemic. So once we start getting back to typical mobility, this could be super problematic. I do appreciate Mr. Konigsmark's remarks about as far as the food bank. I'd love to see more benevolent work like that in our community. I appreciate Ms. Marsh's comments about an MOE, as well as the follow-up comment from another public speaker. But I will say, when people tell you that, just trust me on the plan, that scares the heck out of planners. We're going to do something good in the future. I don't think that really cuts the mustard. And also, as far as needing to have an understanding with the Issaquah Food Bank, this would just be the beginning of a process, because again, things wouldn't even be decided till later in the fall anyway. So that 3 to 4 month timeline that he was discussing, really, it still really doesn't work anyway for them. So those are a few of my concerns as far as the two up zones. Again, one of the things that I saw as far as Wildwood, there was a couple responses to the Issaquah comp plan, and I believe somebody else spoke to it, but I think one of them was about the urban growth boundary. And again, they just kind of said, well, the city has a housing crisis. The city has been hitting their growth targets. In fact, the reason we have new growth targets is because we renegotiated them in 2021. So yes, we're starting out fresh again, but the city has been hitting their growth targets exceedingly well. So a few things on my mind. Like I said, I like the idea of the Issaquah Food Bank. Little timid to hear anyone say, well, just, we're going to do something great in the future. That's a hard sell, especially in the city's biggest choke point for traffic, which again comes down to the city's residents' biggest frustration in the city is traffic. So you're talking about the worst street in Issaquah and putting more and more multifamilies, which again, that's really not where we're supposed to be concentrating the building. The building is supposed to be happening in the central area. So they're building what we want. They're just not building where we want it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Voice. And Commissioner Monahan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Fall. Matt Monahan here. I really resonated with a lot of what Kristen said about how right now we don't have a ton of standards and guidelines to be able to kind of discharge this function right now. And so my biggest fear is that we'll be acting in a way that could be considered arbitrary, and kind of selecting the project to the docket that we might like, or that might have, an initial, when we look at it, we kind of like what's going on, and then we deep six the ones that we don't. So at least at this early stage, and absent some clear legislative guidance as codified in Title 18 or elsewhere, I consider my role to be relatively ministerial. And what I mean by that is, if they've submitted a complete application by whatever deadlines or guidelines that are already in there, that they should proceed to be docketed. I think the city council can definitely take a different approach if they think that staff resources, for example, are better used elsewhere. that at least from my perspective, sitting here today with the law that we have, I think everybody has a lot of great points substance-wise about these projects, and they're very, very legitimate concerns. But at least at this early stage, I'd be leaning towards proceeding with docketing the projects as presented by staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Monahan. And Commissioner Lewis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Fall. Commissioner Joy Lewis here. I really appreciate the comments that Commissioner Voice made tonight. I think that he, without speaking to the particulars of the three applicants in front of us, I do think that all of them need to be weighed the same. While they may have different attributes that contribute to the community, these are all applicants that are coming to us for rezones that are currently outside of the urban growth boundary. They are not in central Issaquah, and they lie along pretty sensitive, critical areas. Right now, we're doing incredibly important work to be able to make adjustments to Title 18, to be able to put in the correct framework. You know, Ron, you had a fantastic point when you were talking about the steep slopes that were on a particular applicant on the Wildwood. We're currently debating what that is. We're currently trying to change and put into code what is a steep slope. And so I'm very hesitant for us to go along with business as usual. As someone who's gone through this process many times before, I think that this year is different. And I think that it would be completely within council's right to decide to put a pause. I would be interested to see if anyone is curious about moving these to the 2023 docket and effectively not passing these through, granted what we're doing right now as a city and what the focus of the administration is. I think it's long overdue. It's something we've been working on for a while, and it's something that we really need to see through to be able to get the desired outcome that we want in the community. And I really have concerns too about staff resources and the ability. Normally on a comp plan on something like this, we alone, just on our commission, would spend 3 meetings. We would have 1 meeting to just have staff go through the details so that we kind of got familiar with it. We would have a public hearing, and then we would have a 3rd meeting where we would actually then make our recommendation. That's quite a bit considering the calendar and resources that staff needs to be able to commit just to us, not even to the applicants. So I think that it would be very reasonable to look at pausing these 3 rezones on the comp plan this year and moving them to the 2023 docket if they should still want to continue at that time. I do want to appreciate the comments that were brought forward by the public and by Ken. I think that these projects are, the comments that I'm making tonight have nothing to do with the merits of them and have instead to do about the work that we're trying to do as a city to be able to create a framework that really works for projects like these to move forward. And what I hope is that instead that the actors in these various projects will be able to continue to work on the planning, continue to work on the preparation, and be able to continue so that when their applications are able to be addressed by staff and by this commission and by council, that they're ready to go and in a more complete state, and that this shouldn't slow down the work at all, and instead is just a reflection on us being able to give the best product to our community possible. So I would love to hear about people's thoughts about the option to move to the next year's calendar docket.
And thank you, Commissioner Lewis. And I also have a comment and question. Clarification from Kristen first. Church parcel ends in 9217. You said that the food bank can operate under its current permit requirements out of the church. So our decision tonight would not impede the food banks and Our Savior Lutheran Church being able to work together and set up a food bank operation out of the church facilities.
It shouldn't, no, because that's a permitted use under SFSL.
Okay.
It's current zoning.
So with that said, I would like to make I'm leaning towards a recommendation of not approving this docket and postponing it till 2023, as Joy had mentioned, because we really need Title 18 to give us direction and steer us in knowing how to make the right decisions. When I look at the Wildwood property, it's got a lot of different critical areas, and I think we need Title 18 to be able to give us the proper directions, because we haven't really ironed any of that out. As far as the the parcel that's on part of the village residential. I don't know what's necessarily required, if Title 18 is going to impact that or not, but I think all three should probably just be tabled until 2023, when there are more resources to be able to put towards the rezoning, and also we have Title 18 to give us the direction. So that's how I'm leaning. Let's go ahead, and it looks like we have another comment from Jason. Go ahead, Jason, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. So again, fantastic comments by fellow commissioners. I think Mr. Monahan brings a point of view that I really appreciate, because again, I think I completely agree with him in the spirit that, you know, as far as legalese, they've done exactly what they're supposed to. But I also know that as far as city planners, you know, this is the future of the city. So I tend to lean more with Commissioner Lewis. You know, again, this isn't saying that they cannot resubmit an application for next year, but Commissioner Lewis makes a great point. We usually have a lot more time and resources to go through these parcels. And also by going through Title 18, we might be able to tighten up some of the standards. So again, that we're not putting major multifamily projects in a very sensitive area, not only environmentally, but again, also referring to the city's traffic problem. So rather than allowing something to skate through, you know, and again, I know that tonight would just really be letting it continue on. I think, like I said, the planning policy can't really make a good decision without having more information about these lots, which are both of them sensitive areas for two different reasons, environment and traffic. So I'm leaning with Commissioner Lewis, but I do hear you, Commissioner Monahan. And like I said, I always appreciate the perspective you bring. But yeah, I think I'm lining up more with Commissioner Lewis, and I do appreciate Chair Fowl pointing out what Kristen had mentioned, because that does make me happy. I do want to see the Issaquah Food Bank being able to expand, and in the future, they could resubmit that application. And like I said, depending on a little bit tighter standards in such a sensitive area, I'm all for it. But again, whenever somebody tells you, no, we've got great big plans, but we got to upzone it now, that's a tough sell. That's going to always be a tough sell with people who are trying to plan for the best uses of our city in especially sensitive areas. So appreciate everybody's comments. Again, I think everybody kind of knows where I'm leaning. If anybody else wants to talk, and then we'll see where the chips fall.
Thank you, Commissioner Voice. Commissioner Bader, do you have any feedback or comments or questions you'd like to volunteer?
Thanks. This is Sarah Bader. I don't, only because I feel like I missed quite a bit in coming in to this, so I don't feel like I can make fully informed comments right now. Thank you.
Okay, and we have a comment from Commissioner Monahan. You have the floor.
Yeah, it's a question followed by a comment. Kristen, I'm wondering if you could answer this. I noticed on page 33 of the packet, there's a check that the church wrote for the rezone application. Did any of the other applications, were they accompanied by checks and fees?
No, and what's happened with that one, they sent it early. It was a sort of a hurry to get the application in for them, and they sent the check, and kind of forgot to tell them that they don't need to submit it until council approves it. So it is sitting in a drawer in our offices. I have made sure, and it won't be deposited until council approves it.
Got it. So that mitigates the unfairness that I was worried about, which is these folks followed the rules, and now they're going to be out $2,500. So at least if the city doesn't proceed, they'll get that money back, which I think is a fair outcome. I recognize I'm a minority opinion here. I still think that, you know, notwithstanding the fact that we didn't cash their check early, I still think these applicants followed the rules as they exist today. Granted, they're going to be better next year. Granted, we're going to have more guidelines to follow. But I think just based on what I've heard today, I will be the vote for the docketing, and I'm more than happy to be overruled by my esteemed colleagues on this commission. So with that, nothing else from me.
Okay. So with that, we're going to conclude, and we're going to move towards taken a motion. Do we want to approve Matt Monahan's first motion, or do we want to make an amendment to it? Or Kristen, point of order?
You need to vote on the motion that is on the table right now.
Okay. So with that, and can we recap what the motion is?
Yes, the motion was to move the 2022 proposed docket of comprehensive plan and zoning map amendments to council as presented tonight. And I want to be clear that there are 3 proposed rezones on there.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take a vote. We're all in favor?
Aye.
And all those
Actually, I believe I need to take roll call. I will do it. We'll do a roll call vote. So as long as you're up there, Commissioner Monahan,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis,
Nay.
Commissioner Boyce,
Nay.
Commissioner Bader,
Can I abstain from voting? I don't feel like I have all of the information. Is that possible?
abstaining is a yes vote.
No, it's a cautious no then.
Okay. And Chair Fall.
No.
All right. The motion does not pass. 4 against and 1 in favor. So the docket will not. It is recommended by the Planning Policy Commission not to move this forward. However, this still does go to the City Council, and they will take action on February 22nd.
Okay, and so I've got a comment from Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Fall. I do want to mention to Kristen that in a summary to council about our recommendation, that I do feel that it represents us to be able to say that we are not in any way voicing a comment on the merits of these 3 rezones, and instead believe that moving forward with Title 18 is the best use of resources to be able to properly address them at a time when Title 18 will be finished. If council does not want to have a moratorium on the comp plan, then we would support their decision to use of resources and moving forward as our Title 18 building codes are. So I do think that it's relevant for them to know in our decision. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
I would like to agree with Commissioner Lewis on that as well. I think she well spoken. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on. We're going to close out this public hearing at 7:28. And we will move into the next phase of our presentation, which is Schedule 18. And we will start off with public comment for Title 18. And Kristen, would you like to, Kristen, are you still there?
I am still here. We usually do the presentation first. Would you like to do that or wait? Or do it now?
We'll do it. We can do the presentation now. Okay.
I need to make Lucy the presenter. Let me hang on one second. Not Arthur, Lucy. There she is. Lucy, you're a presenter now.
Thank you. Too many things open. Let's try it this way. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Lucy Sloman, current planning manager. The purpose of tonight's discussion is a continuation of last week's meeting. There were 2 topics that we said we would bring back some additional materials. One was the sections of the design manual where they might, we had proposed a kind of macro division of them, and I think you all had asked us to show it at a finer grain, so we're going to give you something on that. And then we all began discussing thresholds for compliance with the design manual and some of the challenges that we'd seen. And so we've brought some materials back on that. I will point out that none of you have seen this before tonight because it was only a week ago, and it's taken us most of the week to try and put something together. So some of this is kind of complicated, and I'm sorry about that. So we'll see where we can get to in one presentation this evening. For Commissioner Fall, given the complexity of the second topic, I would suggest that the commissioners be able to discuss each of these separately to discuss questions that staff have proposed. Would that be acceptable?
I would agree with that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So this was the slide we used last week showing that the architectural portion of the design manual would be applied only to the neighborhood overlay for Central, and that the urban design components would go citywide. And there were questions about whether that was really fine-grained enough and accurate. So what we did was try and look at this at a little bit finer grain. On the left-hand side, you see architecture and all the different styles, and those all are going to the Central Issaquah overlay. What we then did was look at the urban design sections and begin to parse those out a little bit more. What we were seeing as we began to look at this is that some of these sections actually naturally go with other chapters that are being discussed separately. So for instance, hillsides and slopesides is an integral part of terrain management, and all of that is really an outgrowth of the chapter in the design manual. Through block passages and alleys are forms of circulation and should be addressed with the whole approach for circulation for the city. And that the urban open spaces, which included courtyards and plazas and parks, that should be addressed through open and community space. The one piece that we think could potentially, as just a preliminary sorting hat, is compatibility, which has to do with whether buildings should be compatible with their neighbors or stand out. We're suggesting that stay with the architectural styles because it is a very style-oriented building design component. And that then other components like natural context, block size, parking structures and lots, and building edges potentially be applicable in urban areas. We are exploring whether there may be some differences between sort of central parts of the city and more outlying parts of the city. But that's something that we are, as I said, still exploring. So our question to you is, does this division and the preliminary destinations seem logical as a starting point for working on draft code?
Okay, so sorry, I was thinking about exactly what you said. I got it at the moment. Let's go ahead and open it up for questions from the commissioners.
I thought it made sense.
Okay, I am not seeing any. Oh, here we go. Commissioner Dillon.
I think this makes a lot of sense, and I think that staff saw as they worked through it that there were natural places and they weren't necessary that become apparent as you look at the individual sections. And so proceeding along these lines to kind of come up with an initial master draft seems to make a lot of sense.
Okay, and Commissioner Morgan.
The answer I would have is yes.
That's succinct.
Okay, I have not seen any additional questions, although we were supposed to have questions, but here we go. Commissioner Lewis has a comment.
Thank you, Chair Fall. Commissioner Joy Lewis. I just want to reiterate my comments from the from last week's meeting, which would basically tell you that this makes a lot of sense by going with the overlay plan. I think that we see a lot of it makes a lot of sense to me without actually seeing different options of how it would be laid out. I still have concerns about the information architecture as it's going to be used and applied. But right now in this preliminary stage, it looks good.
Okay, and I'm actually with Commissioner Lewis on that, so Commissioner Sanford, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair Fall. Richard Sanford. Lucy, I was just wondering about the reasoning behind compatibility for the Central Issaquah overlay rather than a more general urban area or some other more general area of the code.
It's a great question, and I think we're going to need to spend a little more time with that. Some of the Development Commissioner members may remember that the way compatibility worked is that for most buildings, they should be compatible with their neighbors, and compatibility was defined as using the styles that are in the manual. But public buildings were encouraged to stand out, to be unique, to not necessarily be compatible. Some of the examples that were used were and not to say that they aren't compatible, but that they stand out is buildings like the library, City Hall, Fire Station 73, Fire Station 72, that these buildings may be unique, may not necessarily use the style manual because they should be notable and visible, highly visible in the landscape as public buildings that the public would be looking for. So that approach could be used citywide. On the other hand, the content of it right now is very Central Issaquah centric. And so that's why I think we're not sure yet whether we would take that citywide.
That makes sense to me, thanks, because the styles then in the architecture manual tend to define compatibility there. And if we were to apply it more generally, it seems like a very subjective category. But if you keep it in the overlay, it's clearly defined there. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. You're muted, Ron. I'm Chair Fall.
Oh, sorry. Talking to myself again here. So to Richard Sanford's point, is that why we have the question mark in location update is the Central Issaquah overlay? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I am not seeing any additional go. Jason Voice, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair Felt. Just a quick question, Ms. Sloman, which is urban areas, and I do like the layout. I pretty much agree with everyone. This seems pretty easy to read. Urban areas would still be defined as citywide.
Well, not necessarily. We're still looking at this idea that there may be, for instance, block size. It may make more sense in certain center city areas where we're able to complete the grid and we want to break some of the larger blocks into more fine-grained size. That may make sense in certain neighborhoods, but not every single of the outlying neighborhoods where we don't have the same kind of street grid available. And I think that's where we need, I think that's where doing this exercise in a very preliminary fashion was really useful because I think we're wondering on the ones that we put urban edges on, or urban areas on, like building edges, that moving buildings up to the street and having certain kinds of relationships to the street may not make sense citywide. And so that we really need to dig into that some more before we would have a ultimate recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have not seen any additional comments or questions at this point, so let's go ahead and open it up for public comment in this topic. Kristen, do we have any members of the public that would like to speak to this topic?
I believe so. Connie Marsh, I'm going to make you a panelist. Connie, I am not sure if your hand was up before or if this is new, but you're unmuted.
Yep, this is a new hand up. So Lucy just got to the concept of urban areas a little bit for me. That the term urban areas in this chart freaks me out because one of the overarching considerations from last week is preserving neighborhood character. And I still don't see a map that shows what areas are even considered in this grand definition of urban area, and then a map that shows which areas are under some form of either development agreement, which I'm assuming is exempt, or an overlay. And so when I look at this chart, it's very difficult for me to understand whether I agree or don't agree, because I actually don't agree if it's all urban areas. I might agree if I could understand what you were talking about. And then when you use the word edges, there's an old-fashioned term in the world called urban separators. And those are areas that are the interface between less dense and more dense places, so that you don't have, say, single family houses right up against some very commercial loud area. And that sort of gets rid of a lot of the problems you have when you have people living in a used to be suburb turning urban area. And so the nuance is so important to me that my brain won't function with this chart. Everybody else seems sort of happy with the chart, but my brain has hit the red. And then when you say central Issaquah overlay ? For compatibility, and then I look at the Old Town and what their concept of compatibility is, I start looking at my definitions table and I start wondering about how you would possibly define that in a variety of areas. And so if you ask me conceptually if this is pointing in a better direction because you're pulling things out and putting them into categories that will already exist in the code, yes. But for me, you have a long way to go before my brain even hits yellow, which is warning, as compared to explosion. Thank you.
I'm going to check. 1 second, please. Susan Neville, your hand is up. Would you like to speak? Oops, I can't unmute you. Oh,
Thank you.
pardon me?
Thank you.
Yes, you would like to speak?
No, thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, there's no one else who would like to speak.
So is one of the things that we're doing as we go through these conversations is trying to see if there is a consensus among the commissioners to help us move forward. And so I guess I would ask, now that you've had your public comment and had an opportunity to hear from each other, if there is a consensus among commissioners.
Thank you, Lucy. Make my job easy. Okay, we have a comment from Commissioner Voice. I'll open up for comments from the commissioners.
So in response to Ms. Sloman's request, yes, I think you guys are starting off at a good point. I think Ms. Marsh brings up a good point, which I know is what you're looking for, is basically kind of a green light to put in more resources. But she brings up a good point. Commissioner Lewis brings up a good point. Definitely maps and things would help, but I think you guys are on the right track. I think, like I said, this starts breaking it down. It's a little easier to read. I think the way you guys are trying to go about it seems about right to me. And I know it's just the beginning of the process, so it'll get more refined. I know some of our questions that we have tonight will get answered, but I guess if you're just looking for we're on the right track, now we can dedicate more city resources, I'm in favor for it. I think so.
Thank you, Commissioner Voice. Commissioner Brennan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Paul. So I agree. I think I like the way this kind of consolidation or alignment along these kind of more thematic areas makes sense. I was having a similar thought to the comment we heard from Ms. Marsh about the urban areas. If it's applied to a geographic area specifically, then using the term areas or urban area, it would make sense. But if we're applying it to certain development types, so it's an urban development, then and it's not easily kind of consolidated within a mapped area of the city, so it could happen in various locations in the city as a result of the nature of the development that's happening, then you might want to use a different term than area, because that takes you to a geographic location. So that would be it's a terminology issue only. But as far as the way that you're organizing this, I think it makes sense. Anything that you do that really simplifies and clarifies the code, which is the goal, I think you're on the right track for that. So I think you're in going the right direction here.
May I ask a clarifying question? Commissioner Brennan, what I'm taking away from what you're saying is that you would like it to be, shall we say, prescriptively applied to certain geographic areas rather than a performance standard that has to be evaluated about whether the standard applies to that area or not?
It could be either, but it's easier from a simplification application standpoint. If I'm a developer or a builder and I need to know what applies to my land or my project, if you've got it defined within a geographic area, that makes it easy. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't work well, if you can't draw a line around the part of the city where the standard would apply, and it would be certain development types that would trigger these requirements or would apply, these requirements would apply, then I would try to characterize it as urban development. You have to define what an urban development is, where the standard would then apply.
Thank you.
Did that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think we're heading more towards geographic areas than the other. Commissioner Chair Fall, you're muted.
Sorry, hit that mute button. So I actually agree with Commissioner Brennan and Commissioner Voice. In terms of urban areas, having the geographically defined using a map would be very helpful. And I thought Connie brought up some good points. So I'd like to see a map incorporated into this, but I would say that you're going in the right direction. I like the overlay so far, and I'm able to follow along with it. I just think the map would be very helpful. We have a comment here from Commissioner Sanford. You have the floor.
Thanks, Chair Fall. Richard Sanford. I do appreciate the more granular approach to this part, especially through block passage and enclosure and block size. It does strike me that a lot of the urban area, it looks like we're struggling with this definition in the new world, and it seems that there'd be a lot of overlay between that and central Issaquah. It seems like if we're going to draw a map of urban area, it might be challenging to try to see how much is not already defined in central Issaquah. So just struck me. I don't know what the working definition of urban area is going forward into the new code, but I think a lot of us would be interested to see it. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanford. I'm not seeing any additional comments. Last call. Okay. So we'll close this out. And Lucy, we can move on to the next topic.
Super. And what I hear is this is a structure worth continuing with as a consensus from the commissioners. The next piece is more complicated. Honestly, I think you got a sense from our examples last week. So what I'm going to do is present two brief overviews of new construction and sort of remodel and reconstruction, tell you the questions or some of the approaches and options that we have for you, then run through some examples, then return to those approaches and options for you all to discuss them. But we thought that if we put some of the approaches and options up front, it would help you sort of think about them more in a more meaningful way, given that we've given you no time to think about it ahead of time as you're looking at the examples. So the first is new construction. Typically, we think when something's new that it's going to fully comply. But what we're seeing is that it can be complicated when it's just part of a site that's the new construction, not the full site being redeveloped or being built for the first time. So that's the point about new construction. When we're doing a remodel or a partial reconstruction, we're seeing this is the most complicated one to determine what the thresholds are. We have multiple methods available within the city and one example outside of Issaquah that we'll pose to you. And I think part of the challenge is that even when a threshold is triggered, it might be for the whole building, but the site won't be involved. So it just becomes very complicated to parse how much of things are being asked to come into compliance. So some of the approaches and options that we'll put out there for you to ponder as you look at our example is for new construction, any new building on a site has to fully comply. Another option is any new building complies if it's compatible with the existing architecture. I mean, part of the goal is to transform central Issaquah, and some of the styles in the style manual don't necessarily match up with some of the existing styles. And the third option or approach is that a site complies to the extent that the site is impacted. So the area of impact is the only portion that has to comply. With remodeling or partial reconstruction, some of the options and approaches that we've considered is that maintenance is exempt. We would have to define what that term is. That interior changes such as TIs that don't affect the exterior would be excluded from the threshold decision, meaning if you're using value, you don't of the improvements, you don't include a TI as part of that value. Landmark buildings and Issaquah treasures are treated maybe differently, either fully or partially differently than just other buildings. And right now we're using King County improvement values, but maybe what we do, because we're going to present some other options, maybe we offer that applicants can choose some other options like market or insurance value. if they feel that the King County improvement value is not appropriate or indicative, or that the city could require someone to provide the market value. And we'll get into some of the reasons. Kristen, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just want to clarify for those who might not know that a TI is a tenant improvement.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And typically improvements to the interior of their building.
You need a decoder ring to talk to us sometimes. Thank you. So here's one of our examples, Jackson's at Gilman and SR 900. Now, it may seem that this is a new building because this was the previous site plan before they started construction. This is the fuel station, fueling canopy. This was the convenience store, and this was the car wash. And I'll just flip to my next slide so that you get a sense. This is what the site looked like before construction. Whereas now they've torn down their convenience store and they asked to rebuild it. So we said, that's fine, but you're going to have to design it and position it consistent with the manual. But the rest of the site isn't particularly in compliance, in terms of street wall and frontage improvement. I mean, not frontage improvements, but what you're doing along the frontage to create that street wall, that more urban character, because they weren't really touching the rest of the site. And the lower right is the picture I showed you last week of the building, which is compliant with the style manual. So that's example number one. Example number two, you saw both of these at this level of information at Gilman Village. The old tikka masala space is currently under review. Masa and the Recology buildings, different character. Should this portion of the building be asked to use the style manual when the rest of the building is not involved? Or for Eganas, which is burned, but the rest of the building is fine and untouched. So now we're going to get into the really complicated slide. Bear with me, please. We put two examples up here, and I want to run through the examples before I run through the chart. So one of them was the Friends of Youth building, which we mentioned to you last time. It's on about 1/3 of an acre. It has one building. The property is valued at almost $800,000, but according to the King County site, the building is worth $1,000. So most of the thresholds that we use are based, well, the threshold that we use in central Issaquah and some other parts of town is 50% of King County assessed value. So you can imagine that almost anything they do is more than $500. The second example is Heritage Square. We've had several projects within Heritage Square. It has 6 buildings, property value of $10.5 million, improvement values of $1.2 million. But for instance, when the Denny's building was scraped down to the slab and Corner Bakery rebuilt on that site, we only have the value based on the entire property. We don't have the value based on that individual building. So those are just two examples of the challenges where the King County improvement value is a challenge. So as I mentioned, in central Issaquah, we use 50% of the King County value. If you're above that, you have to fully comply. If you're below that, you comply to the fullest extent practical and feasible. So here are some thoughts. One option is to keep that King County value, but maybe it's not below that 50%. We're not saying comply to the fullest extent practical and feasible, because that becomes a negotiation and it's unclear to both staff and the applicant what you're supposed to do. The advantages of using the King County value is the information is free and easy to get. The disadvantage are the two examples I've shown you, where a low value or where there are multiple buildings on site, that makes it pretty hard to know what to do or how to get that value. Another option based on a definition the city uses is substantial improvement. Substantial improvement looks at the market value. So that might mean that you use an insurance assessment or a property assessment, someone to come out and actually define the value right now, and that you are either above or below that 50%. This addresses sites with multiple buildings, but it could be more expensive. You know, someone has to hire someone to come out and do it, and the city may very well want to have that peer reviewed, and that would be the applicant's responsibility to pay for. Another option using a city definition is the term demolish. And that is if you're impacting 50% of the exterior or bearing walls and also structural supports, that determines that you are basically rebuilding that building. You know, that's a very objective assessment, and it's unrelated to the value. On the other hand, that could be quite an undertaking to calculate and to argue about which are bearing walls or structural supports, although the architects in the room might disagree with me. And then lastly, we looked at Bell Red, which when we did some research, I think this was back in 2016, the approach used there was that if you were above a specific value, which at the time in code was $150,000 based on 2009 dollars, you had to come into compliance with a very specific list of standards. So it wasn't the entire code. There were specific sections of code that were identified, and that coming into compliance could be no more than 20% of the project value. So if you were at $150,000, that would be $30,000. The improvements could not cost more than that. The good thing is that it's proportional. Again, it requires determining values and buying into values. So back to approaches and components, approaches and options. So with new construction, like the Jackson site, one option is to say anytime you're building a new building, you have to come into compliance. Another is that you say you have to comply, but maybe you give some flexibility if the architectural styles, the central Issaquah architectural styles aren't really compatible with anything on site. And that site compliance only is to the extent the site is impacted, rather than saying that the whole project is supposed to come into full compliance. Everyone thoroughly confused?
My brain hurts.
I hear you.
Okay, let's go ahead and open it up to commissioner questions. And the first person up is Commissioner Sanford.
Thank you, Chair Fall. Lucy, number 3, site compliance to the extent that the site is impacted. Could you go into a little bit more detail about that? What constitutes site? I understand it as far as Gillen Village, but you know.
So let's go back to the Jacksons example. They were tearing down this building and this building. And so they wanted to replace the convenience store. So that was having to come into compliance. But the rest of the site, say over here where no changes were being made, there was no request. Potential in this approach, you would not ask the western portion of the site to come into compliance because it wasn't being impacted by the actions they were proposing. Does that make more sense as an option, not necessarily that you agree with it?
Right, understand. Thank you.
And the next question is from Commissioner Voice.
Thank you, Chair Fell. So that was a great exercise as far as taking number 3 and laying it over on Jackson. So can we do the same with number 2? So any new building complies with compatible with the existing architecture. So if we're looking at, I guess if we would go backwards to Tiki Masala. So ideally, if that overlay, not overlay, but if that, so if we were to go with number 2, how would that look, Ms. Sloman? Because I thought that looked pretty good with the slide as far as, so if we go back to that slide, right, and we were to use number 2.
So I'm gonna make up an example here. Let's say that Masa and Recology, which are the 2 buildings on either side, are super modern. And this is in traditional Issaquah, which only has historic styles. So maybe we would say that doesn't make sense to stick a very traditional building in the middle of 2 very modern buildings. Or maybe we say that's how we incrementally move in the direction that we've committed to through the manual.
Can I add to that, Lucy, real quick? So I think with this threshold wouldn't apply to this example because it's not a new building. So this would fall under the remodel category. So as you're thinking through, just think of new building as a brand new structure, complete tear down and rebuilding. So there are 2 different, tiers of discussion that we're talking about.
So would the Aganes fall under completely new construction? Because that's going to be torn down to the foundation, correct?
Well, but it's also part of a larger building.
Okay.
So think of, we talked about Heritage Square and where Corner Bakery is. So the design manual did not apply when Corner Bakery was being done. But if you think about the somewhat barn-like building that most of Heritage Square uses, and you have Corner Bakery, which has picked a different style, is that a good way of incrementally moving it forward, or should it have more flexibility? Because maybe none of the, and I'm not saying this is in fact true, but I'm just trying to come up with an example that that none of the architectural styles, if none of the architectural styles in the design manual were complementary to the rest of the existing buildings, you might say you don't have to use the design manual.
Thank you, Lucy. Next question is from Commissioner Dillon.
Thank you, Chair Fall. Patty Dillon. So going back to that list of 3 approaches, it doesn't seem like those are mutually exclusive. I mean, the Jackson's example is applying both 1 and 3, which seems like a logical compromise that's asking a lot of somebody to basically modify their entire site when they're only dealing with a small part of it. And number 2, I think the example that you just brought up about Heritage Square was interesting. I could see 2 ways about it. One being that there's moving toward the design manual does promote incremental improvement, but is another option, a 2A possibly, that that the new building has to apply either fully comply with the design manual, or it needs to be consistent with the surrounding buildings so that you're not coming up with something entirely different. But you're moving in a direction that is consistent with either the area or the design manual. I guess that's maybe a comment as much of as a question, but I'm sure I know the answer.
Fair enough. Thank you.
And Commissioner Morgan, you have the floor. I'm sorry, pause. Commissioner Bader, you have the floor.
Great, thanks. This is Sarah Vader. I think Commissioner Dillon's comment actually helped me clarify my own question because I was struggling to see the difference actually between number 1 and number 3. And it sounds like they can be read as like an and. So it's any new building on site complies and the site complies only to the extent impacted. Is that right?
Yeah, and so thanks for that clarification. I think that's why we use the term approach components, because some of them could be additive and some all are options or alternatives. So thanks for clarifying that. Chair Fall.
Oh, sorry. I was on mute. Commissioner Morgan, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Fall. And this might fall into comment, Lucy, but I guess a question with number 2, could you add if compatible with existing architecture and does not exceed X% of total building area in the project? Like if you're rebuilding 75% of it, you shouldn't be allowed to, but if you're rebuilding less than 25% of it?
Sure.
Okay, and thank you, Commissioner Morgan. Commissioner Sanford, you have the floor.
Thank you, Richard Sanford. A couple of things, a little off the wall, maybe, I don't know. The Issaquah work lofts, Lucy on Gilman, when that was approved, I guess that wasn't technically after the design manual had been released. Is that right?
Actually, no, it's an interesting kind of hybrid. A draft of the design manual had been released. It was during the moratorium, and the council approved a development agreement that they would use the design manual at the point at which it had gotten to, because we hadn't done the final adoption. That was the negotiation with the applicant.
Okay, yeah, and that comes to mind because I remember on the commission we were struggling a bit with how prescriptive to be. We were actually doing an interpretation on that of the requirements that were in the manual, given the use of the building and the setting, and trying to preserve a degree of creativity also and interest in that building. And I think it was actually a positive result. I always like to see that building, maybe because I remember the struggle, but I think it turned out fine. And I guess the point I'm raising is that I wonder if we're in a subjective area here in which the Development Commission really does play a role. And that we have to be the arbiters of whether or not compliance is being attained, given the fact that a developer may be presented clearly with the intent of the kind of matching to the styles that they should be doing. I guess what I'm saying is I wonder if it's the role of the Development Commission ultimately to make that decision. And then secondly, I'll just throw this out, but the Northwest Contemporary style was a style that we do have, and currently it only pertains in urban core. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I guess currently it wouldn't help some of these issues like Aganas and Tikka Masala, but I could almost see Northwest Contemporary being a pretty close match to the current Aganas building. So I wonder if we should even consider possibly expanding the use of Northwest Contemporary out to more of at least central Issaquah to possibly address cases like this and cases of partial redevelopment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sanford.
Minnie would like to speak.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Minnie.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to clarify one thing, that sometimes, Commissioner Sanford, these projects aren't coming to Development Commission because the threshold of the project that goes to the Development Commission is they have to be a certain square footage. And so some of these projects, like the Jackson example, didn't even trigger any land use review. So all of this land use review was bundled up with the building permit. So that's the other part of the mess that happens, is that, very detailed drawings are submitted as part of the building permit. And then some of these conversations start occurring in terms of the land use, which style applies and which doesn't apply, when they have figured out, where your utility line is going to be, what is the thickness of your siding and whatnot. So that adds to the amount of time it takes to review the building permit and all those kind of things. So that's the other part, was which is not an option here, but could be considered, is should only the projects that go through land use approval be subject to the style guide, which is a much higher threshold. That's all I have to say. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Minnie. All right, and we're going to go to Commissioner Brennan.
Yeah, that's an interesting question about what's the process here that you apply. But that's not in front of us today. That's a whole different complicated question. I think when you think about this, is a hard policy choice, because you're balancing the interest of moving the city to the new vision that's been defined in the comprehensive plan and then ultimately the land use code. But at the same time, you don't want to stifle economic development by having so many requirements that are in the way or that are arduous, that don't make sense, and you're not going to see development happen as a result. So for me, I look at the list here, and I would say for new buildings should comply, because a new building is going to be around for a long time. So when you reinvest in kind of the existing or the previous kind of vision or style, that just preserve that over time. But if you want to move to the new image, the new look and feel, the vision of the city, then you want to be more assertive in the way the regulations would apply. So I would say anytime you're building a new building, that the standard should apply. Now, when you're dealing with additions, I consider the number 2 to think more about that as an addition, and those were the examples for the most part to an existing building. It gets a little trickier, but I would say that in that particular instance, I would say that the addition should comply with whatever the design standard is, but if it also it could be modified to really align with the architectural kind of compatibility with the existing. You don't want to have something that is really out of character, that just doesn't make sense when you step back and look at it. So you want to have some flexibility, but the starting place is there's a design standard that the building addition should meet. And then the challenge for the architecture or the architect is try to integrate that into the existing building so that it makes sense when you look at it. I think we ran into these challenges, similar discussion when we were talking about updates to the Old Town neighborhood residential standards, about what trips the upgrades. And then the other piece, when it comes to site improvements, this idea of proportional compliance, where you have, when the exterior of a building is being modified or an investment is being made, but it's not an addition, it's not a new building, but it's a significant investment that's being made that would prolong the life of the building. You do want to say, well, we do want to have certain elements of that investment align with the future vision of the city, and you would be selective about where you want that investment to happen. That's the Bell Red example that you put out there, Lucy. That would seem to make sense as a strategy. It's a little more complicated to administer, but you can set thresholds in there and point specific thresholds that that improvement we shouldn't exceed. In the case, I think you showed the Bell Red example of 20% of the overall project value, and you could set that line at any point you want. But I think it makes sense to continue the policy direction is, let's move to the new vision, and let's not reinvest in what was the old vision, where that where there's an opportunity to responsibly and economically responsibly move that direction. So that would be my read on the three, in my mind, the completely new building, in addition to a building, and then modification or investment in an existing building. You would carve those up a little differently.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Brennan and Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Fall. Commissioner Joy Lewis here. I really appreciate the comments by Chair Brennan right there. I think that was a very succinct way of putting something that I'm coming along on. I certainly am curious why originally the King County value was chosen, and I think it's clear that that model isn't working. And so I would almost encourage us to go back to the county and point out, there's an issue here that actually could be leading to some larger issues. We've kind of, I think, may have found a little canary in the coal mine here. I'm certainly interested by doing a project value. Right now, building materials is extremely high, so I can see how it may be economically disadvantageous for a developer to want to go with that method. But it's certainly intriguing, especially in the case of the Friends of Issaquah building. I'm sure just to repaint that building would be in excess of $20,000 just for a paint job. And so when we start looking at that, might have actually a more appropriate valuation for moving forward and things like that. So I do think that needs to be addressed. I don't recommend going forward with the current model of the King County value system. I do think that new buildings should fully comply with the design standards. What I want to see is how do we get to have the fullest compatibility, right? Rather than having some sort of loopholes and discretion. I could argue on the Jackson site that instead of having the extent of the site being impacted, that instead the west side is impacted. By tearing down the car wash on the east side, the west side looks very different. I could see a different way of saying, if you razz your site down, then no holds barred, right? To be able to say, if you've changed the makeup of how you're orienting your space, then you need to completely redo the entire site. They would have needed to meet some sort of threshold of the percentage that they were tearing down. And instead, by completely leveling what they had, then all aspects of that site now need to apply to the design manual. I'm just saying there's, I think, a devil's advocate approach to it. I do like having more of a balance, but I think that it's easy to see a large corporation coming into a prominent, visible corridor in our city needing to have a high standard. And that's the reason that we have the design manual. So I want to advocate for us really having a strict view of how we realign what needs to be tweaked right now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Lewis. Ron stepped out for a moment, so I'm acting chair. Commissioner Schulte, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyce. My comments are very similar to that of Commissioner Lewis and Commissioner Brennan. I'm in support of, new building construction, having to comply, as well as improvements, matching the existing structure as much as possible. I do recognize the need to, maintain the brand of a specific building, a specific company. And there's still opportunities to, integrate well into the existing architecture. I mean, you look at examples like the city of Leavenworth, right, where you have these brands like Starbucks, still integrating into the Bavarian style of Leavenworth. So there's definitely opportunities for that. Regarding number 3, I do like what Commissioner Lewis mentioned about the site compliance. I think what we need to be mindful of is we don't want to be in a position where we're driving around and we're looking at pockets of land where half of the land, is developed and the other half is not, right? I mean, it doesn't look good to the city in terms of growth, in terms of this movement towards our vision, in terms of sustainability. So there's definitely thresholds that can be implemented, even higher thresholds that, promote, the full redevelopment of the property. I mean, at the end of the day, it is their property, right? So, it's, they're the landlord, right? I mean, we got to keep that property, have that good upkeep. So we just got to be mindful of that. And I think it was Commissioner Morgan earlier who mentioned the idea of a square footage as a way to, calculate the value or the improvements. And I think that could be a great approach. I mean, it's not always it is difficult to obviously calculate what 50% is, but when you take a look at things in a square footage value, that can sometimes make it easier as well. Floor area, roof area, foundation area, and so on. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'm back. Thanks, Jason.
Right. Yep.
Okay, Commissioner Kevin Price, you have the floor.
Welcome back. Thank you. So with respect to the valuation question, using the King County valuation method for establishing the threshold, am I understanding that you're only using the improvement value and not the land value? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Was it ever contemplated to use land plus valuation? I'm sorry, land plus improvements? Because that would significantly increase that threshold. And the county values are historically low. That's the tax basis value, right? That has nothing to do with the real estate value. And so why, or did you consider using both of those in the equation?
Well, I think we did not include the land value because we're looking at the improvements are the part that we're looking at. I think what you're identifying is the flaw in using King County values. And as much as Commissioner Lewis thinks the county cares what we think about their values, they are, I will say on a number of levels, they are really only interested in things from a tax perspective. And they do crazy things with property lines and other things because it makes sense from a tax perspective. So really, it is only for their tax purposes, even though we know many, many people use it for lots of different purposes. So I think that we have better ways of looking at the improvement values, such as market, rather than trying to use the land portion to help us understand the improvement value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what you're searching for is a tool that establishes a common threshold across the board. I think even a third-party consultant establishing value, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for inconsistencies. I don't know. I find it always interesting when you're getting a loan or financing a house that it appraises to the penny that your offer was. So I just think there's potential pitfalls in that method as well. And I just wondered if you were to include the land value, would it go further to create some predictability and from a source that, to your point, is free and readily accessible and irrefutable. I don't know. That's all I had. It was more of a question. Beyond that, I would like to just agree with Commissioner Brennan and his remarks. I think they would align directly with mine. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Minnie, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, I was just going to say that's true that, the King County assessor value is readily available. And what we don't want to get into is getting these market appraisal values and we have to review them and then go back and, but that's an option to consider the King County assessed value of the property as a whole, of the building and the land value together. I think the issue is, we're getting in the King County assessed value, but for the new construction, there isn't that threshold. It's just whether you're new. So that threshold comes into play when you're doing additions and remodels. So I think the two issues are kind of getting overlapped in our discussion, which perhaps just if we can focus on just the new construction, options, which don't necessarily tie in with the assessed value unless we say, new building should probably be a square footage. So if you have a 5-acre site and you're building buildings on 75% of the land area or something, then the entire site is going to comply. I think that was one of the discussions as to what's the extent of the site impacted threshold. So that's just on your site. If you have more than half of your site you're redeveloping, then the whole site comes into compliance. Or if 75% of the site is being impacted, then the entire site comes into compliance because you don't want to leave 25% of it alone. So this threshold doesn't quite tied to the assessed value unless we want to tie that as the options laid out here tonight.
Thank you, May. And Commissioner Dillon.
So I was going to go back to kind of the site extent too, and that percent of site might be a good way to get at it. But I was thinking initially I was going to echo what Commissioner Brennan said, something of the Bell-Red approach, that you do need to make other improvements to the site, but the extent of those improvements is tied to the value of your featured project. And because I can see, as Commissioner Lewis was suggesting on the Jackson site, perhaps there is reason to improve the whole site, and that is, there's one operation, one use there, and potentially an argument to be made. But something like a Heritage Square, and you're replacing, Jack in the Box or Denny's. Certainly, the new building should be in compliance, but that seems way too much to ask to then take an entire site that is, possibly 5 to 10 times bigger than your project and improve that. So having, whether that threshold is area or whether that threshold is value, I think having that defined for the site compliance would be the way to go.
Thank you, Commissioner Dillon. And Commissioner Brennan, you have the floor.
So kind of carry on the discussion on the thread that we're on about how do we deal with a site where you've got multi-buildings. I mean, when you think about an existing building on a new building on a piece of property and it stands alone, that one's pretty straightforward. If you're talking about adding to an existing building, you can set a minimum threshold, number of square feet exceeds a certain percentage that might trip it. So I know where you're trying to go is try to figure out fairly predictable thresholds so that it's not a lot of discretion and confusion for the staff and the applicant. The condition that I think that's the most difficult is the multi-building, the Jackson store situation. We've got multiple buildings and only partial improvement is going on or partial replacement is going on. The idea, again, of using a threshold that's based on square footage and value is easier to administer if you can figure out what that threshold would be. So if you're the example that Minnie that you were describing, where your certain percentage of the site is being redeveloped as a result of, this could include not only the building footprint, but what's going on around it if you're doing new parking, etc. But when that improvement crosses a certain threshold, then full compliance is necessary, or some proportional compliance would be triggered, like frontage improvements or something like that, that are kind of one of the more important elements that you're trying to get for walkability and etc. So I think as much as you can focus it on square footage or predictable thresholds and not debate dollars and what something's worth, is a lot easier to administer. But I think you're still for an existing building that's not being added to, but the exterior is being modified. That one is a little trickier. You might have to deal with a value-based threshold of some sort. So I guess that, like I said, there's 4 different scenarios. There's an entirely new building stands alone on a property, in addition to an existing building, and then you've got the multi-site or multi-building site, and then just the remodel or facelift of an existing building to try to figure out where the thresholds are.
All right, and thank you very much, Commissioner Brennan. And I'm not seeing any additional questions or comments.
I believe Commissioner Ikeda just indicated he had one.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, yes, sorry. Commissioner Ikeda, go for it.
Thank you, Commissioner Fall. Just a question back on the item number 2 on any new building complies if compatible with existing architecture. If and the intent is to move to the new design standard, a new building can be just separated by an expansion joint or nearly butting next to each other. So I'm just kind of curious if there's a separation between the buildings, because in the situation of, say, Gilman Village, you could have a building that looks completely different if there's a standard that applies that way.
Well, and for those of you, I did have some slides of Heritage Square, but none of it was under the design manual, so I haven't shown it to you. But there's Corner Bakery, which was a freestanding building. But for those of you who frequent Heritage Square, you may be familiar with Rio Cafe, which is on the end towards Jack in the Box. And it's, there was no, again, design manual. Their choice was to do something architecturally completely different than the rest of the building. So the rest of the building has this sort of agricultural kind of shape and materials. And then you have a very modern stucco end cap to the building. Maybe we don't care. And maybe we do. But to the question that's being asked, I think those are the kinds of situations. To what extent do we want to control those choices?
And one comment I think that having site development related to percent impacted makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Should we go to the next set of questions? Chair Fall?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. All right, we'll go to the next set here. I'm not seeing additional questions or comments from the commissioners.
So to Commissioner Bader's excellent point, these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Some of these could be additive or based on the intensity. But to recap, potentially maintenance is exempt from having to comply. If you're replacing all of your windows, you can replace them in kind. A big one that happens is replacing your rooftop HVAC and having to screen it. It gets bigger and bigger with time, it seems. And so it may be more visible, but maybe that's just part of waiting for the building to catch up. Option number 2, or one of the alternatives, is that interior changes are specifically excluded from the threshold decision. Option 3 is that landmark buildings and buildings listed on the Issaquah treasures are treated separately somehow. And the third or the fourth is, I can't read the numbers anymore. The fourth is that we might start with the King County values as a sort of initial take, but offer options either because an applicant wants to use a market or insurance value, or because there are multiple buildings on the site that the city requires them to do that kind of assessment.
Okay, and now we'll open this up for commissioner comments or questions. And Commissioner Morgan, you have the first question.
Thank you, Chair Fall. This is Mel Morgan. Lucy, I have a question about when I was looking at the code in 1808-050, talks about non-conforming situations. it appears to have a 75% of improvement value threshold to determine the review level, but then your other slides were talking about a 50% threshold. Are those two different thresholds that looking at?
So having looked at one portion of that recently, I'm not sure if it's 050. You're doing better at remembering the numbers than I am. I believe the 75% threshold is where there's involuntary loss. So if there was a fire or an earthquake, so that's why it's setting such a high value before you have to come into compliance, because this is involuntary destruction, not where you're making a voluntary choice.
Great, thank you. And then I guess one other question or something maybe for consideration would be to use replacement cost, and you could build in a Marshall valuation service cost, replacement cost number that becomes less susceptible to appraisal questions, things like that. And I don't know if that's something that's been considered or not. And that could even be run by the city itself.
Is that similar to building values? I know that when building permit costs are based on the improvements, and we often get those, but they're kind of checked against standardized valuations based on construction type and such. Is that what you were referring to?
It is. It's typically what most appraisers would use when they estimate insurable value, what it should cost to rebuild the building, or if they're trying to estimate what it should cost to replace a building for a cost approach and an appraisal. It's a fairly common. It's been around for decades, and Commissioner Brennan may know more from what other services they might use, and what he is saying. There's Dodge Construction Services too, I think, but Marshall Valuation Services would be a very standard one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan. I'm not seeing any additional questions or comments. Lucy, do you have another set of questions? We have a comment from Commissioner Brennan.
Thank you, Chair Paul. So real quick follow-up on Commissioner Morgan's comment. The Marshall kind of approach is the most common that I've seen. Just what Lucy is referring to is a square foot valuation that's used to determine value to establish a building permit fee, and it's just based on the type of construction they use and the size of the building, you get a value. It's a fairly straightforward approach, and again, like Commissioner Morgan said, it's less subject to being contested because it's a formula. You just apply the formula. You do the math, you get the same answer. So I think that approach would make sense as an alternative to if you're going to use a value-based, and that the replacement value is something that it's a higher, and you have to decide what the threshold is based on the replacement value, which would be significantly higher than many of the King County values that would be applied to those property or to those improvements. And then on the questions here, or the points about maintenance being exempt, I think you need to figure out how, what's included in maintenance. But yes, I think we want people to take care of their buildings. We don't want them to be afraid of tripping, a costly improvement that would be necessary to meet the new design standard. And so then they don't maintain the building and it starts to become an eyesore. So you don't want that. As far as the interior changes being excluded from the threshold, again, it's back to the question about how aggressive do you want to move toward, changing the character of the city to align with the new vision. If it's excluded, that can be a significant part of the investment that's going on into an existing building. I would suggest that anything that's improving a non-conforming building would probably be included as part of that, but as part of the valuation and making that threshold determination. So that would be my take on that. And then, yes, I think the landmark and the Issaquah treasures, those, they are unique and you want to preserve those. And so maybe there is a different approach. I don't know exactly what it would be, but it seems like they need to be handled with some sensitivity to make sure that you maintain their character because you're trying to preserve those. You're not trying to move them to a different place. So that's a little different strategy. And then the final one back to the using, the Marshall valuation approach would be probably a better approach than the King County value would be my suggestions on this list.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Brennan. So with that said, I'm not seeing any additional comments or questions. So I guess a point of order for business. Christian, do we want to open this up for public comment?
That is up to you, but that is typically what we do, yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and open up for public comment and see if there's anyone who would like to speak tonight.
Should I stop sharing my screen so you can see better?
Yes, please.
It looks like Connie Marsh would like to speak. So, Connie, you are a panelist and you are unmuted.
All right. Well, this is Connie again. And that is a monster conversation, you guys. So, briefly, I agree with Commissioner Brennan on almost all parts, and Commissioner Lewis and those in support. Elephant in the living room is okay. Basically, Issaquah got settled by the taxes being raised and the rules being changed and agriculture being booted out so developers could make money, and Issaquah changed, right? And that is how big change happens quickly. And so when you look at the rules and regulations that you want to put in place for improvement value and redevelopment value, this is basically what you're talking about. You're talking about how quickly do we want to potentially force major change in the city of Issaquah, and how delicately do we want to do that foxtrot, right? So we have lots of development that, they don't want to develop for 50 years. They're making massive amounts of money. So in these rule changes, you have the potential for making it harder for them to hold on to their properties for the next 50 years and not get those changes. And to me, that's the core of the conversation. Do you want to allow them to easily upgrade their development and continue to make money and not get the large change that we've all agreed upon? And I'm not here to make the value judgment on that. We are a suburban city attempting to say that we are mature enough to have dense development with a sophisticated traffic support with transit and pedestrian orientation. And I frankly don't think we are there. I don't think the land values support that yet. So in sort of a gross overlook of how quickly can Issaquah become what we have envisioned its future to be, I think that's actually the conversation that we need to have. We've just sort of dived right into the nuts and bolts of how to get to that interesting future. So given that overarching interior debate, I am going to say the conversation that Richard said about about the Development Commission actually being involved in some of these conversations. Well, I think that's really interesting because I look at Jackson's and I see a big, huge blank wall. And I thought we were not supposed to have big, huge blank walls. And the back is just blank. So I think a commission would have been very helpful in that situation because I don't like it. I think it's hideous. And every time I drive that way, I cringe and I want to call the city and complain. Also, I see all the trees are gone. I looked the other day and there is not a stick widget left. Yet in the pictures, I see that they originally had trees. So it's hard for me to understand how somehow that site wasn't being impacted when all the trees that were there are now gone, including the frontage trees. So given that sort of odd view of how I drive through the city and I look for the vegetation, Lazy Boy, they did a partial thing and all they had to put was like a rain garden and they don't have any trees. So I disagree. I think that given our city is a tree city and we're trying to be verdant, that we should at least have vegetation and landscaping standards. And I think that's included in site. And then we also have to have the ability to let people improve their site without triggering having to redo their architecture, right? Because if they're improving their site and if they want to re-landscape their site, it's $50,000, and now they have to do something else to their buildings in order to accommodate that. You sort of have this woggle back and forth. I know in a place where I leased, they were afraid to replant a tree because they were told that they could, if in order to work on their landscaping, they had to resubmit a landscape plan. And then that was going to cost them $50,000. So they just didn't do anything. And they still don't do anything. And the trees, they go away. So this is a situation with this exterior visible maintenance. We have to make it easy to make the city look great, even as we go through iterative change. And again, you see, I'm not talking about the details. I'm just talking about sort of a goal language. And so this brings me back to, can you tell me exactly what the goals are that we're aiming for with these decisions that we're making? What exactly are we trying to do and in what priority order? And that might help for staff to understand what is most important, because I don't feel that we're prioritized. And then one last comment is potentially you could say, well, you're going to impact X square and you need to then enhance 15 feet in all directions of X square. And then we're going to give you a checklist of choices for improvement, and you can choose 1, 2, 3, or 4, but you have to do some improvement toward our future vision, but you get a choice in what though that might be. And Gilman Village is a treasure. So, holy hot spit. That would be really fun to come up with standards for how to work with Gilman Village. And could you allow them to be bigger and taller and better and more attractive? Well, never mind. So you see, I go down the bunny hole so freaking fast. So I'm going to summarize by saying, if you wouldn't mind going into your brain and looking bigger, try to understand exactly what these smaller rules are trying to do, and then decide amongst yourselves whether we're trying to get this city redeveloped quickly or we want a slow and attractive change. And I don't know that answer, but there you have it. Thank you.
going to check with one of our attendees. One moment, please. Susan Neville, your hand is up. Would you like to speak?
No, it isn't, and I apologize.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night. So there is no one else who would like to speak.
Thank you, Kristen. We'll go ahead and close public comment and open it back up for commissioner comments or questions concerning the public discussion we just had. Give you a moment there. Not seeing any additional comments or questions. So with that said, I guess we'll close out the presentation tonight and we'll move into general business. Kristen, do we have any reports from the city tonight?
Excuse me. I just want to mention that many will be going to the city council, I believe, on February 7th, just to give an update to them on Title 18 and how that's going. And, many can expand if you like. And then after each of our meetings regarding buckets, after our public hearings and then deliberations, she will also be going back to the city council just to sort of summarize how those meetings go if you all want to tune in. Minnie, do you have anything to add?
No, thanks, Kristen. Yeah, so the idea is we want to, we had one study session with City Council in September after you all had discussed the natural environment topic with the environmental board. So that was the last briefing we had with council. And on February 7th, we will do another briefing, give them all the information, how busy all of you have been doing the gaps analysis. We're coming to a closure of the gaps analysis and policy guidance phase and getting into the actual code drafting stage. As you all know, the first code update drafts were released for Shoreline Master Program and the outdoor lighting, and we hope to release the other ones for critical areas in the coming weeks. So just kind of giving that status update to City Council. And then like Kristen said, once you get into reviewing the code drafts, what we are contemplating at this point is before we have the hearing, we will have an open house for members of the public to drop in if they have any questions about the draft code language to get those answered from staff. For each of the 6 buckets. So there'll be 6 hearings you all are going to have. We will have an open house for prior to each one of those hearings, and then the deliberation. So a lot of these are going to be, joint public hearings with Environmental Board, Development Commission, and the Parks Board. So we have a schedule we're going to lay out with council on how they want to be briefed. But the idea is that we would brief them once a month at least after you all finish your hearing and deliberation on each of the 6 groups. I think that's all for now, but we'll circle back with you all after we talk to City Council and see what they'd like to do, if they confirm that that's the right approach. That's it. Kristen, over to you.
Thank you. Speaking of calendar, I did not include one in this meeting or the last one in the packet. And DC, you may be interested in this as well. I think we have updated. I just want to share it with you because there's a lot coming up. I'll share my screen really quickly. Oh, Lucy, could you please make me a presenter? Actually,
Yes, I'm working on that.
That's okay. I was able to do it. Okay. There we go. So there's a lot coming up. Here's today. So February, that one's coming off. We won't be having that public hearing. So we look forward to seeing you again on December 10th when we'll be talking about circulation standards and parking. And then we have a meeting with the environmental board. And as I believe many mentioned, we have sort of split up the natural environment pieces because it was just too much. So we'll be having a public hearing with the environmental board. You all have your special meeting with the environmental board to talk about stormwater plan, where you will be guests at their meeting. On the 10th, the environmental board will be back at our meeting to talk about the public hearing for the rest of the natural environment. And then on the 24th, another regular meeting, you will deliberate. So the environmental board will actually stay at these two meetings. You'll hold the public hearing. The environmental board will deliberate, just them, and then the PPC will deliberate on March 24th. We've added a meeting, and this is what I wanted to show you. I'm sorry. This means that we have had to adjust our joint meeting with the park board. So we'll have our public hearing with them on April 7th and deliberation on the 14th, and back to Development Commission for zoning and uses on the 28th of April. So just a lot coming up, and we've had to add some meetings. I just wanted to share that with you. I'll put it in your packets. But just a heads up, I think the April 7th meeting is new, and March 9th we talked about last time, but I want to be sure that's on your calendars as well.
Kristen, can you put the calendar back up, please?
I'm going to send it to you too, but yes, I can put it back up.
Yeah, so think about like in March, you're going to be thinking everything critical area related. April, you're going to be thinking landscape and trees and open spaces. And then May, you'll be talking zoning and uses.
Can you go back to February?
Yes.
So question, February 10th, we will have a joint meeting with the Development Commission, not a public hearing.
Correct.
Okay. And then on the 24th, we are having a public hearing on the 18th, on Title 18.
Yes.
That's a presentation, not an actual public hearing, because we're not making a decision, right?
You're not making a decision, but we are going to hold a public hearing. And the public hearing during these is the time when we actually open it up for public comment and allow for public comment on that topic, and then we close it. That is technically the public hearing.
Okay.
And then we will hit the environmental board, will deliberate. And no, you aren't making a recommendation, but what that means is that when you deliberate about this topic, you will just deliberate about those comments that you heard during the public hearing portion of that meeting.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yep. Thank you for confirming that.
You're welcome.
Okay. And with that, do we have any other additional business or announcements?
No.
Okay. None. We're going to adjourn the meeting at 9:03 p.m.